The price of a smile. Imagine this for a moment. You have everything money can buy. A mansion that touches the clouds, cars that shimmer like mirrors, and people who bow when you walk by. Yet, in the middle of all that, there's one thing your fortune can't bring back, the smile of your only child. That was the reality of Richard Hall, a billionaire who built empires, but couldn't rebuild his daughter's broken heart after a terrible accident. She stopped smiling. She stopped speaking. Her silence echoed louder than the sound of his wealth. He tried everything: doctors, therapy, vacations, music. But nothing worked. Until one day, fate led him to a park, and to a poor little boy selling flowers. That boy had nothing. No fine clothes, no education, no comfort. Yet he carried something that Richard had long forgotten: joy. And with a single act of innocence, he did what all the money in the world could not. He made Richard's daughter smile again. Before you watch this story, ask yourself, what would you give to see the person you love most smile again? Would you trade your fortune for one moment of pure happiness? This is not just a story about wealth and poverty. It's about humanity. The invisible bridge between hearts that have and hearts that have not. It's a reminder that sometimes the richest souls are the ones who own nothing at all. So before we begin, I want to ask something of you. Don't just watch, feel. Imagine yourself in Richard's place, standing in a world where money means nothing, and one child's laughter becomes the most valuable sound you'll ever hear. If this story moves you, if it makes you believe that love can heal even the deepest wounds, then leave a comment below telling us what kindness means to you. And please, share this video so more hearts can remember that a single smile can change the world. Now, let's begin. The billionaire who hid his identity and cried when a poor boy made his daughter smile for the first time since the accident. The silent mansion. The morning sun touched the windows of a mansion that seemed more like a museum of silence. Inside, every corner whispered memories of laughter that had faded long ago. The billionaire, Richard Hall, stood near the grand piano, staring at the framed photo of his daughter, Emily. Her smile in that picture used to brighten his entire world, but that was before the accident. Since that day, Emily had not smiled once. Her once bright eyes had turned into a sea of sadness. Richard had built companies, funded hospitals, and donated millions, but he couldn't buy back his daughter's happiness. He had all the money in the world, yet he felt poorer than anyone he knew. Doctors said Emily would recover physically, but emotionally she was locked away. Richard tried everything: therapists, vacations, even private performances from her favorite singers, but nothing worked. Emily sat by her window every day, watching people from a distance like a soul trapped between two worlds. One evening, Richard overheard his staff whispering in the hallway. He gives everything to the poor, but his own daughter hasn't smiled in months, one said softly. Those words pierced him deeper than he expected. For the first time, he felt ashamed not of what money couldn't do, but of how disconnected he had become from real life. That night, unable to sleep, Richard made a decision that shocked even himself. He would leave the mansion, not as a billionaire, not as a name everyone respected, but as an ordinary man. He needed to understand what made people live with so little and still find reasons to smile. Maybe then he could find the missing piece of his daughter's heart. He left a note for the butler, asking him to tell no one. At dawn, he changed into plain clothes, grabbed a small bag, and drove out of the estate in an old car that nobody would recognize. For the first time in decades, he looked like any other man on the street. Days passed. He wandered through markets, small cafes, and parks where children laughed freely. He watched mothers scold their kids lovingly, and fathers chase after them with open arms. That simple chaos of life felt warmer than all his luxury halls combined. Yet something inside him still felt incomplete, until one afternoon he saw a small boy playing near a fountain. The boy couldn't have been older than 9. His clothes were torn, his hair messy, but his eyes sparkled with the kind of joy that no wealth could imitate. He sold flowers from a small basket, running from one person to another, offering a rose for a coin. But what struck Richard most was not his poverty. It was how he smiled at everyone, no matter how many ignored him. Richard sat on a bench and watched. After a while, the boy noticed him and ran closer. "Sir, would you like to buy a flower for someone you love?" the boy asked cheerfully. Richard smiled faintly. "Someone I love doesn't smile anymore," he said quietly. The boy tilted his head. "Then maybe she needs a flower more than anyone else." Richard felt his throat tighten. He bought the flower and asked, "What's your name, son?" "Leo," the boy replied. "My mom says when you can't make someone rich, make them smile. That's free." Those simple words hit Richard like lightning. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about Leo. He returned to the park the next day, and the next, learning more about the boy's life. Leo lived with his widowed mother in a small apartment near the city edge. They barely had enough to eat, but their laughter filled the room. Richard began to help quietly, buying flowers, fixing their broken window, leaving food at their doorstep without revealing who he truly was. He wanted to understand kindness without wealth, and slowly he did. The more time he spent there, the more he realized that real happiness wasn't about abundance, but connection. One weekend, Richard decided to bring Emily out. He told his staff they were going for a short drive, but he ended up taking her to the same park. Emily sat silently beside him, holding her favorite stuffed bear, her face blank and distant. When they arrived, she barely looked around, but then Leo appeared. He ran toward them, holding a handful of flowers. "Hi, I've seen you before," he said to Richard, then turned to Emily. "Would you like a flower, miss? You look like you need one." Emily didn't respond. She stared at the ground. Richard's heart sank, but Leo didn't give up. He started making funny faces, pretending the flowers were talking to each other. Slowly, Emily's eyes lifted. Her lips twitched, unsure whether to respond or not. Then, for the first time in months, she smiled. It was small, fragile, but real. Richard's eyes filled with tears. That moment, that simple act, broke something inside him, a wall he didn't even know existed. He turned away so Emily wouldn't see him cry. For the first time, he wasn't crying out of loss. He was crying out of gratitude. Leo laughed with Emily as if they had known each other forever. The sound of her laughter echoed through the park, blending with the rustling leaves and distant music of life. To Richard, it was the sweetest melody he had ever heard. When they left, Emily held the flower tightly in her hand. "Dad," she whispered in the car, "can we come back tomorrow?" Richard nodded, unable to speak. The billionaire who could buy anything had just witnessed the one thing money could never purchase, a child's genuine smile. That night, Richard sat by Emily's bedside. As she slept peacefully, the flower resting beside her pillow, he looked out the window and whispered, "Thank you, Leo." For the first time since the accident, he felt whole again. The lesson of simplicity. The next morning, Richard woke up earlier than usual. He wasn't used to feeling this light inside. But something about that smile, Emily's smile, had changed everything. For years, he had paid attention only to numbers, deadlines, and investments. Now, he wanted to pay attention to life. He decided to return to the park again, this time alone. The air smelled of freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery, and the sound of street musicians filled the space with an unexpected beauty. It was the kind of music that didn't need perfection to move hearts. It was human, raw, and real. Leo was already there, placing flowers carefully in his basket. When he saw Richard, he waved with excitement. "Hey, mister, you came back." Richard smiled. "I had to. My daughter can't stop talking about your magic flowers." Leo grinned. "They're not magic, sir. They just remind people that life is still beautiful." The boy's innocence made Richard wonder how someone with so little could see the world with such light. "How do you stay so happy, Leo? Don't you ever feel sad?" Leo thought for a moment. "Sometimes. When Mom's sick, or when I can't sell enough flowers. But she always tells me sadness is like rain. You don't stop living because of it. You just wait for the sun again." Richard looked at the boy in awe. Those were words even philosophers would admire, spoken by a child who sold roses for survival. Later that afternoon, Richard followed Leo home. It was a small, run-down apartment in a noisy neighborhood. But inside, it was filled with warmth. Leo's mother, a woman named Clara, greeted him kindly. Her eyes carried tiredness, but also peace. The place smelled of soup and detergent, a simple life, but a clean one. Clara invited Richard to sit. "Leo talks about you all the time," she said, serving him tea. "He said you're the man who buys flowers not for beauty, but for hope." Richard smiled gently. "Your son has more wisdom than most people I've ever met," Clara sighed. "He learned early. His father passed away when he was 5. We had nothing left. But Leo never complained. He told me, 'Mom, when Dad went to heaven, maybe he left me his smile to keep you safe.' That's the kind of boy he is." For a moment, silence filled the room. Richard felt something heavy press against his chest. Guilt. Guilt for all the people he had ignored, for all the lives he could have touched directly, instead of just signing checks from his glass office. When he returned home that night, the mansion didn't feel the same. It was beautiful, yes, but cold. The servants greeted him as always, but he realized he didn't even know most of their names. He walked through the grand hall and saw reflections of his own emptiness in the polished marble floor. Emily ran to him. "Dad, did you see Leo today?" Her voice carried a spark of joy that had been missing for months. "He said next time I can help him sell flowers." Richard's eyes widened. "He said that?" "Yes," Emily giggled. "I want to help too. Maybe if I sell some, people will smile back at me like they do at him." Richard knelt before her and touched her hair softly. "You can do anything you want, sweetheart." That night, while Emily slept, Richard sat in his study, thinking deeply. He realized that for years he had donated money, expecting recognition, his name on hospitals, schools, and foundations. But Leo had taught him something else. That true giving asks for nothing in return. The next morning, he made a decision that would change his life forever. He would create a new foundation, not under his name, but anonymously. It would support families like Leo's, those who worked hard but were forgotten by society. He went back to Leo's neighborhood, wearing the same simple clothes. As he entered, some people looked at him curiously, wondering who this quiet man was. He found Leo again near the fountain. "Leo, I need your help," Richard said. "Mine?" Leo blinked. "But I'm just a flower boy." "That's exactly why," Richard replied. "You understand people better than anyone I know." They spent hours walking through the area, meeting families who struggled every day. Single mothers, old men with broken backs from years of labor, children who dreamed of school but couldn't afford it. Each story broke Richard's heart and rebuilt it at the same time. Later that day, while helping a street vendor fix his broken cart, Leo looked up at Richard and said, "You're not like the others who come here. You listen." Richard smiled faintly. Maybe that's what I forgot to do for too long. For weeks, Richard visited the neighborhood, daily, helping quietly. He paid medical bills anonymously, fixed roofs, and brought clothes for children. The people started calling him Mr. Hawley without knowing his real identity. He didn't correct them. For the first time, he didn't want to be known as a billionaire. He just wanted to be known as a good man. One evening, Clara invited him to dinner again. They ate simple rice and vegetables, laughing as Leo told stories about his day. When it was time to leave, Clara said, "You've done so much for us. I can't imagine why." Richard looked at her and said softly, "Because your son made my daughter smile." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She didn't know what to say. She only placed her hand over his and whispered, "Sometimes the poorest people give the richest gifts." That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He went to Emily's room and found her asleep with a small drawing in her hand. It was of her Leo and him in the park, all smiling. Underneath, she had written, "Happiness is when hearts meet." He stared at the drawing for a long time. He finally understood. Wealth isn't measured by what you own, but by how much love you share. As dawn approached, Richard opened his laptop and began drafting plans for his new foundation. Its name would be simple, the Smile Project. Its goal was to bring joy where life had taken it away. He smiled to himself as he typed. For the first time, his work had meaning, not numbers, but faces. Not profits, but purpose. And far away in a small apartment, Leo was also awake, whispering a prayer of thanks. Little did he know, he had changed the life of the richest man in the city. The hidden truth. Weeks turned into months, and the world outside Richard's mansion began to change in subtle ways. The Smile Project had started to grow. Anonymous donations appeared in forgotten neighborhoods, repairing schools and creating small clinics. No one knew who was behind it. To Richard, that anonymity was freedom. Freedom from applause. Freedom from ego. But balancing his double life wasn't easy. Each morning, he returned to the corporate world surrounded by men in suits who only saw numbers. And each evening he drove back to Leo's neighborhood, where he saw life in its purest form. People helping each other because they cared, not because they wanted something. One night, while walking through the narrow streets, Richard overheard a conversation between two local workers. "You know that old man who keeps helping everyone?" one said. "They say he's just a retired teacher." "A teacher?" The other laughed. "Whoever he is, may God bless him. The world needs more people like him." Richard smiled quietly. He didn't correct them. The less they knew, the better. His goal was never fame. It was healing, not just for them, but for himself. The next morning, his board of directors held a meeting. "Mr. Haw," one executive said, "our quarterly profits have dropped by 12%. Should we cut the charity budget?" Richard looked around the table. "We will not cut it. We will double it." The room went silent. "Double?" another asked, shocked. "Sir, investors will question your priorities." Richard stood up, then let them question. "I'd rather lose investors than lose my humanity." He walked out of the room, leaving behind a wave of confusion. For the first time, his company's purpose started to mirror his own heart. That weekend, he took Emily back to the park. She wore a bright yellow dress and held Leo's hand as they fed the birds. Watching them laugh together made Richard realize how deep their bond had become. Emily's trauma was healing, not through therapy, but through friendship. At one point, Leo turned to him and said, "Sir, my school is closing soon. They can't pay teachers anymore. Maybe I'll have to stop studying." Richard felt a sudden ache. "That's not right, Leo. Education is what keeps hope alive." Leo shrugged. "It's Okay, I can work more and help Mom. Maybe next year. Richard stayed quiet. That night, he made a call. Within days, an anonymous donation saved the school. Books, uniforms, and even breakfast for students arrived. When Leo found out, he was speechless. "Who would do this for us?" he asked. Richard smiled softly. "Maybe someone who believes in you." One evening, Clara approached him as he walked by their street. "Mr. Howell," she began hesitantly, "I've seen you helping everyone here. But I also noticed your car. It's not something an ordinary man drives." Richard froze for a second. "Clara." She smiled kindly. "Don't worry, I won't tell anyone. I just want to say thank you. Whatever your reason is, I know it comes from a good heart." Her words lifted a weight from his chest. He nodded silently. "Sometimes I wish I could do more," he said. Clara replied, "Sometimes the smallest things mean the most." A few weeks later, the local newspaper printed a story. Anonymous donor transforms entire district. Pictures of the new school, renovated park, and hospital filled the page. Emily cut out the article and placed it on her wall. "God, whoever did this, they're amazing," she said. Richard looked at her and smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, they truly are." But his secret was getting harder to keep. One of his employees, Daniel, a young and ambitious manager, began noticing his absences and strange behavior. One evening, Daniel followed Richard's car out of curiosity. When he saw him entering the poor neighborhood, dressed plainly, his eyes widened. "The boss? Here?" Daniel stayed hidden and watched as Richard greeted the locals like old friends. The next morning, rumors started spreading in the company. "Mr. Hale's been disappearing every evening," someone whispered. "Maybe he's hiding something." When confronted by his business partner, Richard said calmly, "If helping people is something to hide, then yes, I'm guilty." But the whispers didn't stop. The media soon caught wind of it. Paparazzi photos showed him walking in poor areas, handing food to children. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire living a double life." Richard woke up to flashing cameras outside his gate. "Mr. Howell, why did you hide your philanthropy? Is this a publicity stunt?" Reporters shouted. He tried to stay composed, but the noise grew unbearable. Inside, Emily looked frightened. "Dad, why are they saying bad things about you?" He hugged her gently. "Because sometimes people don't understand good things when they don't have a name to blame." That evening, Clara called him. "Leo's worried. People are coming here asking questions about you. What should we do?" Richard sighed deeply. "Tell them the truth, that I'm just a man who wanted to see people smile." But the storm didn't end. Social media twisted his actions into accusations. Some said it was a strategy to avoid taxes. Others claimed it was an attempt to rebuild his image. For the first time, Richard felt the cruelty of the same society he had tried to help. Yet among all the noise, Leo's small voice stood out. He appeared on a local interview and said, "That man is my friend. He made my mom laugh again. He made my school better. He's not pretending to be good. He just is." The video went viral. Millions watched the little boy defend a billionaire with more honesty than any press statement ever could. When Richard saw the clip, he couldn't hold back his tears. "That boy," he whispered, "is richer than I'll ever be." The world began to change its tone. Journalists softened their words. The story shifted from scandal to inspiration. And in the middle of it all, Richard realized something. No secret stays hidden when it's built on truth. One quiet morning, he drove to the park where it had all begun. Leo and Emily were playing near the fountain again, just like the first day. The sound of their laughter rose above the noise of the city pure and innocent. Richard sat on the same bench, closed his eyes, and smiled. The world finally understood what his daughter had shown him first, that love and kindness can heal even the deepest wounds. He whispered to himself, maybe that's what wealth was meant for all along. The storm and the silence. The days following the viral video were filled with chaos. Reporters camped outside Richard's mansion. Helicopters hovered over his property, and his phone rang endlessly with offers for interviews. But Richard refused them all. He had no intention of turning his truth into a performance. What he had done was never meant for headlines. Inside the mansion, Emily grew nervous. "Dad, will Leo be okay? People might bother him." Richard smiled softly. "He's braver than most adults, sweetheart. He'll be fine. But you know what? Maybe we should go see him." They drove quietly through the morning fog, taking back roads to avoid attention. When they reached Leo's neighborhood, the place looked different. Reporters had already been there too. Microphones, cameras, and curious onlookers surrounded the area. Clara was standing by their door, shielding Leo from the flashing lights. When she saw Richard, relief washed over her face. "They've been here since sunrise," she said. "They want him to talk more." "He's just a boy." Richard walked toward the crowd. "Leave them alone," he said firmly. "This is not your story to exploit." A reporter shouted, "Mr. High, why did you hide? Your identity? Was this a social experiment?" He turned to face them. "No, it was a human one." His calm voice carried a power that silenced the noise for a moment. "I wanted to understand the lives I thought I was helping from a distance. And I learned something that no fortune could ever teach me." "Which is?" one asked. "That the greatest wealth," Richard said slowly, "is being remembered with kindness, not with fame." The reporters stood still. Even they, for a brief moment, couldn't twist those words. After the media left, Richard, Clara, and Leo sat together inside their small living room. The television outside still echoed his name, but the air in that little home was peaceful. Clara sighed. "They won't stop until they get another story." "Let them chase noise," Richard said. "We'll live in silence." He looked around the humble room. It was filled with small details. A cracked vase, a picture of Leo as a baby, a hand-sewn curtain fluttering by the window. It reminded him of what he had missed for years. Simplicity, the kind of simplicity that carried meaning. That night, back at the mansion, Emily hugged him before bed. "Dad," she whispered, "Leo said the world is noisy." "Because people forget to listen," Richard smiled. "Then we'll listen for those who can't." He barely slept that night. The world had discovered his secret, and though most praised him now, the pressure of public attention began to weigh on him. Investors started calling, warning that his company's reputation was at risk. Some board members demanded that he step down as CEO. "You've become a distraction," one of them said coldly over the phone. Richard replied calmly, "Then maybe it's time someone else ran things. The company was never supposed to own my soul." The next morning, he signed the resignation letter. The billionaire had stepped away from his empire, not in defeat, but in freedom. When the news broke, people reacted in disbelief. "He gave it all up," headlines read. "The billionaire who walked away." Some mocked him. Others called him a modern saint. But to Richard, it didn't matter anymore. His life finally belonged to something greater than numbers. Days turned into quiet weeks. Without the constant noise of business calls or meetings, Richard found himself waking up to birdsong instead of alarms. He spent mornings walking with Emily, helping Leo with schoolwork, and volunteering at community kitchens. The same hands that once signed billion-dollar deals now served soup to strangers. But not everyone admired him. A powerful investor named Arthur Sloan once Richard's close friend, felt betrayed. "You ruined the market image we built for years," Arthur said during a tense meeting. "You made philanthropy look like rebellion." Richard looked at him and replied softly, "Maybe rebellion is what humanity needs." Arthur slammed the table. "You'll regret this." Richard smiled faintly. "If kindness brings regret, then I will accept it gladly." As months passed, the Smile Project continued to grow. Schools and hospitals flourished across regions. Children who once lived in despair now dreamed again. Emily often accompanied him, distributing toys and reading stories to young patients. She laughed freely now. Her laughter, once lost to tragedy, had become his favorite sound. One evening, while watching Emily and Leo paint together in the park, Clara approached Richard quietly. "You've given people hope, Mr. Hawley. But what about you? What gives you hope now?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Seeing others rise. That's my hope." Clara nodded, with gentle admiration. "You know," she said softly, "your daughter told Leo something beautiful yesterday." "Oh? What did she say?" "She said, 'My dad was rich when he bought everything, but he became truly rich when he started giving.'" Those words echoed inside him long after Clara left. That night, Richard stood on his balcony, looking out at the city lights. They no longer looked like symbols of power to him. They looked like candles, fragile but bright. He whispered to himself, "Maybe that's what light really means, to shine for someone else." But the peace wouldn't last forever. One rainy night, while returning from a charity event, Richard's car skidded on a wet road and crashed into a barrier. The driver was safe, but Richard hit his head against the window. He woke up hours later in a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and beeping machines. Emily was by his side, holding his hand tightly. "Dad, don't leave me," she cried softly. He smiled weakly. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. I still need to see you and Leo graduate from life's biggest lessons." The doctor said he would recover, but he needed rest. For the next few weeks, he stayed mostly in bed, reflecting on his journey, from emptiness to meaning, from pride to humility. One evening, Leo came to visit. He brought a single white rose. "For you, sir," he said shyly. "You once bought one for someone you loved. Now it's my turn." Richard took the flower with trembling hands. "Thank you, Leo. You've taught me more than all the books I've ever read." Leo grinned. "Then promise me something. When you get better, we'll go sell flowers together again." Richard chuckled softly. "It's a deal." And as the rain tapped gently against the window, the billionaire closed his eyes, not in pain, but in peace. He had finally learned what it meant to live a full life, not measured in years, but in love given freely. The return of light. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and quiet hope. For weeks, Richard remained under observation, recovering slowly but surely. The media, once relentless, had finally moved on to other stories. The world seemed to have calmed, leaving him space to breathe again. It was in that silence that he rediscovered gratitude. Every day, Emily and Leo visited him, bringing laughter to the sterile room. They told him about their school projects, new friends, and the latest stories from the park. Clara often came too, carrying homemade soup that reminded him of home, not his mansion, but the home of peace he had found in her kindness. One afternoon, Richard looked out the window as the sun painted the sky orange. "You know," he said softly to Clara, "I used to watch sunsets from the balcony of my mansion, but I never really saw them. I was always thinking about tomorrow's meetings." Clara smiled. "You see them now because you've learned to stop counting minutes." He nodded, his eyes still on the fading light. "Funny, isn't it? I used to think time was money. Now I know time is mercy." After 2 months, Richard was discharged. But instead of returning to his mansion, he chose to move into a smaller house near Leo's neighborhood. It wasn't luxurious, just comfortable, with a garden where Emily could play and he could sit quietly with his thoughts. The city no longer recognized him as the billionaire. To most, he was just Mr. Hawley, the kind man who helped at the local shelter. Life became beautifully ordinary. He learned to fix his own coffee, to greet the mailman by name, and to smile at strangers without reason. The simplicity of it all healed him, in ways no doctor ever could. One morning, as he walked through the park, he noticed Leo sitting alone on the bench, his usual cheer missing. "What's wrong, Leo?" Richard asked, sitting beside him. Leo hesitated before speaking. "My mom's been sick again. She doesn't say it, but I can see it in her eyes. I'm scared." Richard's heart clenched. "Have you taken her to the doctor?" "She won't go," Leo said quietly. "She says we can't afford the medicine." Without hesitation, Richard placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You let me worry about that, all right? No mother should suffer when help is right here." Within hours, Clara was in a private clinic, receiving the best care. When she woke up and saw Richard beside her, tears welled up in her eyes. "You've done too much already," she whispered. He smiled softly. "You gave me back my daughter's smile, Clara. This is nothing compared to that." Days later, as she recovered, Leo ran through the halls of the clinic, bursting into Richard's arms. "She's going to be okay," he shouted. The boy's joy was contagious. For Richard, that moment was more rewarding than any award or profit he'd ever received. Weeks passed, and Clara regained her strength. On the day she was discharged, she held Richard's hand and said, "I used to think people like you only help to feel powerful, but you help because you've known pain." He nodded. "Yes, pain teaches what comfort hides." That evening, they all went to the park again, the same place where everything began. Emily brought her sketchbook, Leo carried his basket of flowers, and Clara sat under a tree, watching them with a soft smile. Richard watched the two children laughing together. He could almost hear echoes of his wife's laughter in the wind. For a moment, he closed his eyes and felt her presence, calm, forgiving, proud. He whispered silently, "I finally found what you wanted me to see." Emily called out to him, "Dad, come here. Leo wants to show you something." He walked over to find Leo holding a small piece of paper. "I wrote something for school," Leo said shyly. "It's about heroes," Richard smiled. "Can I hear it?" Leo nodded and began to read. "A hero isn't someone who wears a cape or saves the world. A hero is someone who saves a heart. My hero doesn't have powers. He has kindness. He taught me that even rich people can be rich in love too." The words caught in Richard's throat. He turned away slightly, wiping a tear before it could fall. Emily hugged Leo tightly. "You're amazing," she whispered. As the sun began to set, they all sat together in silence. The world around them continued. People walked their dogs, couples held hands, children played. But for Richard, time stood still. It was a perfect moment, the kind of peace he had searched for all his life. Later that night, Emily came to his study, holding her drawing book. "Dad," she said, "I made something for you." On the page was a simple picture, a man holding hands with two children, one on each side, all smiling under the sun. Above them, in childish handwriting, she had written, "Asterisk, happiness is not having everything, but sharing everything you have. Asterisk." Richard stared at it for a long time. Then he pulled her close. "You and Leo taught me that, sweetheart." From that day on, Richard dedicated his entire fortune to expanding the Smile Project. It became a global movement, not driven by wealth, but by compassion. Volunteers from around the world joined to build schools, orphanages, and shelters. Every new project carried a simple symbol, a small flower drawn by Leo, representing hope blooming in the hardest places. Years later, when Richard grew old, he spent most of his days sitting by that same park bench. Emily had become a doctor, working with children. Leo ran the foundation, still carrying his basket of flowers, though now it was filled with letters of gratitude from people he had helped. One evening, as the golden sunset bathed the park, Richard felt a familiar presence beside him. It was Leo, now grown, smiling warmly. "We did it, sir," he said. "People smile because of you?" Richard shook his head gently. "No, Leo. They smile because of us." He looked around. Children laughing, parents playing, a scent of flowers filling the air, and smiled one last time. "Do you hear that?" he asked softly. "That's the sound of life. It's beautiful." Leo nodded, eyes misty. "It always was, sir. You just helped the world listen again." And as the evening light faded into stars, the billionaire who once hid his identity closed his eyes in peace, surrounded not by gold or marble, but by the warmth of hearts he had healed. The man who once thought he had everything finally left behind the one thing that would never fade, love that kept smiling. The legacy of a smile. The years had been kind to Richard Holloway, not in terms of wealth or fame, but in the quiet rewards of a life well lived. His hair had turned silver, and his hands carried the gentle tremor of age, but his eyes still held that same warm light that once reached across boardrooms and park benches alike. The world had changed since his decision to walk away from his empire, and so had he. The Smile Project had now expanded far beyond his imagination. What began with one small park and a boy selling flowers had blossomed into thousands of communities spreading hope across continents. Each new school, clinic, or home carried a single symbol at its entrance, a delicate hand-drawn flower. To the world, it represented generosity. To Richard, it represented Leo. On a mild spring morning, Richard sat in the garden of his modest home, reading letters from children across the world. One message read, ***, thank you for helping us learn to read. My dream is to become a teacher like you. **, another said. **, my mother is smiling again because of your project. **, he placed the letters in a small box beside him, the same box that once held stock certificates and contracts. This, he thought, was his true fortune. Now, Emily, now a graceful young woman, came outside carrying 2 cups of tea. "You've been reading those letters all morning," she said with a smile. "You never get tired of them." "How could I?" Richard replied, sipping his tea. "Every one of them reminds me that the world can still heal itself. One kind act at a time." Emily sat beside him. "Leo called earlier. He said the new orphanage is almost ready. He wants you to come to the opening ceremony." Richard chuckled softly. "I wouldn't miss it for the world. That boy has turned into a force of nature." A week later, the opening day arrived. The new building stood at the edge of the same park where everything had begun years ago. Children played in the yard, their laughter echoing between walls painted with bright colors and words like hope, courage, and love. Richard stepped out of the car slowly, his cane tapping the ground. As he walked, the crowd applauded quietly, not out of obligation, but out of genuine respect. Leo approached him, tall now, confident, and with the same spark in his eyes. "Sir," he said warmly, "welcome home." Richard smiled. Home indeed. The ceremony was simple. No celebrities, no cameras. Just people. Teachers, volunteers, parents, and dozens of smiling children. Leo took the stage and began to speak. Many years ago, a man bought a single flower from a boy who didn't know its worth. That flower changed everything. It reminded us that kindness can grow anywhere, even in the cracks of the hardest concrete. He turned toward Richard. Today, we honor that man, not as a billionaire, not as a hero, but as a friend who believed in us when we had nothing. Applause filled the air. Richard stood, his eyes glistening. He walked to the front, leaning on his cane, and faced the crowd. I once believed that money could fix everything, he began, his voice trembling slightly. But I learned that the richest currency in the world isn't gold, it's compassion. You can spend it endlessly, and it only grows. He paused, looking at the children. When I lost everything that truly mattered, a little boy reminded me what life was. That boy showed me that a smile is worth more than a fortune, because it gives hope to another soul. His voice softened. So, if you ever wonder how to change the world, start with one person. Start with one smile. The audience stood in silence, many wiping tears. Leo stepped forward and hugged him tightly. You taught me that too, he whispered. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Richard stayed behind. The park was quiet again, just as it had been on that first day. He sat on the old bench, his heart full of gratitude. The air smelled of spring flowers, and he could hear faint laughter in the distance. Emily and Leo talking near the fountain. He closed his eyes and remembered his past life, the boardrooms, the luxury, the endless chase for more. None of it seemed real anymore. What remained were moments. Emily's first smile after the accident, Leo's laughter, Clara's kind eyes, and the countless faces that had found hope through the Smile Project. He took a deep breath and whispered to the stars, "Thank you for giving me another chance." As the night deepened, Emily and Leo came to sit beside him. "Dad," Emily said gently. "You should rest." Richard smiled faintly. "I'm already resting, sweetheart. I'm right where I belong." They sat together, watching the reflection of the moon ripple across the water. After a long silence, Leo said, "Do you ever miss your old life?" Richard chuckled softly. "Sometimes I miss the noise, until I remember how much peace I gained from losing it." The three of them laughed quietly. Time passed slowly, softly. The world seemed to hold its breath around them. The next morning, when Emily came to wake her father, she found him sitting peacefully on the same bench. His eyes were closed, his hands resting gently on his lap, and a faint smile lingered on his face. The flower Leo had once given him lay beside him, perfectly preserved between the pages of his notebook. Emily fell to her knees, tears rolling silently down her cheeks, not of pain, but of love. She knew he hadn't left in sorrow. He had left fulfilled. At his memorial, hundreds gathered, not to mourn a billionaire, but to celebrate a man who taught the world how to feel again. The foundation continued under Leo's guidance, growing stronger each year. And on every anniversary, Emily would visit the park with a single flower, placing it on that old bench. One day, when she brought her own children there, she told them the story. "This is where your grandfather learned what money could never buy," she said softly. "And that's why we still smile, because someone once decided to share his." As the children ran off to play, she sat quietly, looking at the sky. The wind carried a faint whisper, gentle, familiar, and full of peace. It sounded like her father's voice saying, "Keep smiling, sweetheart. That's how the light stays alive." And somewhere, beyond the noise of the world, the billionaire who hid his identity smiled once more. Not in memory, but in the countless hearts he had touched, where his story would live forever. The weight of gratitude. Years passed after Richard's memorial, yet his presence lingered in the laughter of children, in the blooming flowers of the park, and in the quiet acts of kindness that now spread far beyond borders. The world remembered him not as a billionaire, but as the man who taught humanity that compassion was a form of currency. His story lived on, whispered in classrooms, shared in newspapers, and retold by those who had once been touched by his kindness. Emily had grown into a woman of strength and grace. Every time she stepped into a hospital ward, she carried her father's light with her. She had chosen to dedicate her life to children in need, often traveling to distant villages where the Smile Project had built schools and clinics. Each place she visited seemed to carry the same essence, a symbol of a small flower drawn by Leo, now the official emblem of the foundation. One morning, Emily stood before a new children's home being inaugurated under the Smile Project's banner. Dozens of little ones clapped and cheered as she cut the ribbon. Cameras flashed, but Emily's eyes were focused on a single boy holding an old photograph, a faded image of Richard sitting on the park bench. The boy handed it to her shyly. "My mother said he once helped us when we had nothing," the child said softly. "She told me to thank you." Emily's eyes welled with tears. "It's your thanks that keeps his dream alive," she replied, kneeling to meet his gaze. "Never stop smiling. That's what he wanted." Meanwhile, Leo had become the living pillar of the foundation. His once small hands that sold flowers now signed documents that changed lives. But even as responsibilities grew, he never forgot the park bench or the man who believed in him. Every morning, before meetings, he visited the same park, placed a fresh flower on the bench, and whispered, "We're still growing, sir." A foundation had expanded globally with projects across continents. Yet Leo refused to let it become another corporate machine. This was built from kindness, he would remind his team. If we lose that, we lose everything. His leadership inspired thousands. Employees and volunteers referred to him affectionately as the flower boy who became a guardian. One afternoon, after returning from a conference abroad, Leo received a letter with no sender's name. The handwriting was elegant and slightly shaky. He opened it carefully. "Dear Mr. Leo, you don't know me, but my mother was one of the first teachers hired at the Smile Project school years ago. She passed away last month. But before leaving, she asked me to tell you something. Tell them kindness never dies. It only changes hands. Thank you for continuing what one man started. The world needs you more than you know. Leo folded the letter and sat silently, the words echoing through his heart. He realized that gratitude wasn't just about saying thank you. It was a living chain, passed from one soul to another. That night, he visited Emily. She was working late, reviewing medical reports by candlelight. When Leo handed her the letter, she read it slowly, her lips trembling. "He would have loved this," she whispered. "He always said kindness was the only investment that never fails." Leo nodded. He was right. But sometimes I wonder if we can keep it pure. The world is changing. People want recognition, fame, and power. Even charity has become business. Emily looked up. Then it's our job to protect what he built. Not for him, but for the children who still need a reason to smile. The next morning, they announced a new initiative. The Halle Fellowship *, a scholarship program for children from poor families who wanted to study medicine, teaching, or social work. The first ceremony drew people from across the country. On stage, Emily and Leo stood side by side, surrounded by hundreds of students whose dreams were now within reach. During her speech, Emily said, "My father believed that wealth isn't measured by what you keep, but by what you give away. These young people are proof that love can build legacies stronger than stone." After the event, an elderly man approached Leo. His hands trembled as he reached into his coat pocket. "Sir, I was a janitor at your school 30 years ago," he said. "Your project paid for my daughter's education. Today, she's a doctor working in Africa. I came just to say, thank you. Leo's eyes softened. No, sir. Thank you. People like you are the roots of this foundation. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Leo and Emily sat together on the same park bench where it all began. The flowers around them swayed gently in the wind. Fountains sparkled with reflected moonlight. Do you ever think he's watching us? Emily asked quietly. Leo smiled faintly. I don't think, I know. They both looked up at the stars, and for a moment, the air felt alive, as if Richard's laughter still lingered among the trees. The park, once a silent witness of sorrow, had become a sanctuary of gratitude. Children's laughter echoed through the night, mingling with the sound of rustling leaves. Emily turned to Leo. You know, sometimes I think Dad didn't just teach us how to live. He taught us how to continue living through others. Leo nodded. And we'll keep doing that until there's no child left without a reason to smile. The night grew quiet. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed softly, marking the passage of another day. But for Emily and Leo, sitting side by side, it wasn't the end of a day. It was the continuation of a legacy built not by fortune, but by faith in humanity. The final promise. Months passed, and the Smile Project continued to grow beyond what anyone had imagined. New centers opened in Asia, Africa, and South America, and governments began to model similar programs based on its philosophy. Yet, as success surrounded Leo and Emily, both knew that expansion came with new challenges. The larger it grew, the harder it became to protect the soul of what Richard had started. One evening, Emily sat at her desk, surrounded by stacks of reports. Leo, she sighed, we're being invited to partner with huge corporations. They're offering millions, but they want to rename the project. They want branding, ownership, image rights. She paused, frustration in her tone. It's like they want to buy kindness. Leo leaned against the wall, arms crossed, deep in thought. Money helps, Emily, but it's dangerous when it starts to control the message. He picked up an old photo of Richard and held it between his fingers. He didn't build this for profit or praise. We can't let that happen. Emily nodded. Then what do we do? Leo smiled softly. We keep our promise that this project would always belong to the people, never to power. And next morning, they gathered the senior team. Many argued that rejecting corporate support was foolish. We could help millions more with that funding, one board member insisted. Think about scale. Leo looked at them calmly. And what happens when they ask us to change our message? When they tell us which children deserve help and which don't? No, the moment we let greed touch this, everything we stand for dies. There was silence in the room. Some disagreed, but most respected Leo's conviction. Emily added, our father used to say, the moment money becomes the goal, love becomes the casualty. They both walked out, knowing they had made the harder, but right, choice. Later that week, Leo visited a construction site where a new orphanage was being built. It was raining heavily, and the workers were struggling with muddy ground. Instead of staying dry, under the canopy, he rolled up his sleeves and helped carry bricks. The workers looked at him in surprise. Sir, you don't need to do that, one said. Leo smiled. If I can't build with you, I don't deserve to lead you. That moment was captured by a volunteer photographer, and within days, the photo went viral. The caption read, asterisk, the man who carries kindness instead of power. Asterisk, it became a symbol of humility and leadership, spreading across social media and inspiring a new generation of volunteers. Meanwhile, Emily faced her own battle. Her work in hospitals had drawn attention from international organizations. They offered her prestigious positions abroad, promising higher salaries and recognition. But she turned them down every time. "My father didn't build a legacy for me to chase prestige," she told one recruiter. "He built it for me to chase purpose." Still, life wasn't without hardship. One winter, the foundation faced its greatest test. A devastating earthquake struck a region where several Smile Project schools were located. News broke that hundreds were injured and communication lines were down. Without hesitation, Leo and Emily flew to the disaster zone. When they arrived, the sight was heartbreaking. Rubble, dust, and the faint cries of survivors filled the air. Volunteers were already on site, but resources were scarce. Emily rushed to set up emergency clinics, working day and night without rest. Leo coordinated rescue teams, refusing to leave until every trapped child was found. After 4 sleepless days, Emily found Leo sitting on a broken wall, covered in dust and exhaustion. "You need rest," she said gently. He shook his head. "Not yet. There's still a family unaccounted for." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "Dad would be proud of you, Leo." He looked at her and smiled faintly. "No, Emily, he'd be proud of us." At sunrise, the last child was rescued, a small girl clutching a stuffed bear. As she was carried to safety, she looked up at Leo and whispered, "Thank you, sir." He smiled weakly, his eyes heavy with emotion. "You don't need to thank me. Just promise to smile again." The child nodded, her tear-streaked face breaking into a tiny grin. It was the kind of moment that erased fatigue and replaced it with faith. Weeks later, when the dust had settled and rebuilding began, Leo stood at the site of what used to be a school. Only fragments of walls remained. He kneeled, placing a single flower on the ground. "You once gave a flower to a man who'd lost everything," he whispered, remembering Richard's first meeting with him. "Now it's my turn to give one back, for all the lives we've touched." Emily joined him, holding a candle. Together, they stood in silence as the wind carried the faint sound of children's laughter from nearby tents. That laughter was the music of survival, the echo of hope. As they walked back to camp, Emily asked, "Do you ever wonder why he chose us? Why Dad found you that day?" Leo smiled softly. "Maybe I didn't find him. Maybe he found himself through me." Emily looked at him thoughtfully. "You sound more like him every day." He laughed quietly. "Then I guess I'm on the right path." When they returned home, months later, the foundation received letters from survivors all over the world, children, families, and volunteers expressing gratitude. Some sent handmade drawings of flowers. Others sent small donations wrapped in thank you notes. One letter simply said, "Asterisk, you gave us back tomorrow." Asterisk. Leo placed all the letters in a glass case at the foundation's main hall. Above it, he hung a plaque engraved with Richard's favorite words. Asterisk. The smallest act of love can rebuild a broken world. Asterisk. That night, as Emily turned off the office lights, she noticed Leo still standing by the window, gazing at the city lights below. "You're thinking again," she teased. He smiled, just remembering. The world still has darkness, but we have enough light to keep going. Emily nodded. "Then let's promise, no matter how far this grows, we'll never forget where it began." Leo turned to her and extended his hand. "Promise." Their hands met, sealing a vow that stretched far beyond blood or time. A promise to carry forward a dream that had started with one man, one child, and one smile. The eternal smile. Years later, the world had changed in ways that even Richard could never have imagined. The Smile Project had become a global symbol of compassion, not as a charity, but as a movement that reminded humanity that kindness was still the most powerful force in existence. People in faraway lands wore small pins shaped like Leo's flower emblem. Hospitals, schools, and orphanages bore the same sign, a symbol that had outlived its creator, yet carried his soul in every corner of the world. Leo had aged gracefully, his once youthful energy replaced by quiet wisdom. Though his hair had grayed and his steps slowed, his spirit remained unshaken. Emily often joked, "You've become the new Richard Hawley," and he would laugh softly, saying, "No one can ever be him. We can only continue what he began." On a golden afternoon, Leo visited the park once again, the same place where everything had started decades ago. The bench was still there, restored but preserved exactly as Richard had left it. The flower engraving on the armrest shone faintly in the sunlight. Children ran past, their laughter echoing through the trees. Just as it had years ago, when a lonely billionaire met a poor flower boy. Leo sat down slowly, feeling the weight of years and gratitude. He carried with him a leather journal, the very same one Richard used to write reflections and notes about the project's beginnings. Inside were pages yellowed with age, filled with sketches of flowers, quotes about life, and handwritten letters that Richard had never sent. He turned to one of the final pages and read aloud softly, "If one day I am gone, and the world forgets my name, let it still remember a smile that once changed a heart." Leo closed the book and smiled through tears. "The world didn't forget, sir. It remembered more than you ever dreamed." Just then, Emily arrived, holding a small bouquet. She had aged too, her grace now marked by gentle wrinkles and the wisdom of a lifetime spent healing others. "I thought I'd find you here," she said warmly. "I come here every year," Leo replied. "It's the only place where I feel like he's still sitting beside me." Emily placed the flowers on the bench and sat next to him. "He is," she whispered. "Maybe not in body, but in everything we do." They sat in silence for a long while, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and amber. After a moment, Leo spoke. "Do you ever wonder why it was us? Why he met me that day, in that park?" Emily smiled softly. "Because you were the one person who reminded him that wealth doesn't create joy. People do." Leo nodded. "I've met kings, presidents, and millionaires, but no one ever taught me more than that man. And now, I think it's time I passed that light to someone else." Emily looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "I've been mentoring a group of young volunteers," Leo explained. "One of them reminds me of him. She's fearless, selfless, and believes that love can heal everything. I think it's time for the next generation to lead." Emily smiled. That's exactly what he would have wanted. The next week, a grand conference was held to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Smile Project. Thousands of people gathered from around the world. Teachers, doctors, former students, and children whose lives had been changed by the movement. The event was held outdoors, in the same park where it all began. A massive banner hung above the stage. Asterisk 50 years of smiles, one legacy of love. Asterisk. Emily and Leo sat in the front row. As the ceremony began, a young woman stepped onto the stage, bright-eyed, confident, and full of hope. Her name was Anaya, the new director of the foundation. She began her speech with a trembling voice. 50 years ago, a man sat on this very bench and bought a flower from a poor boy. Neither of them knew that moment would start a chain of kindness that would change the world. That man taught us that wealth means nothing if it cannot bring light to another soul. Today, we honor him not by mourning, but by continuing his work." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "And to those who carried his legacy, to Emily Hawley and to Leo, the boy who became the guardian of this dream, we say thank you." The crowd erupted into applause. Emily smiled with tears in her eyes, but when she looked beside her, Leo's seat was empty. She turned quickly. He was still sitting, eyes closed, a peaceful smile resting on his face. Her heart trembled. She reached for his hand. It was still warm, but still. Leo had passed quietly during the applause, his final breath leaving him surrounded by the very joy he had spent his life spreading. There was no pain, no fear, only peace. The crowd had no idea. The music played. The speeches continued, and somewhere in the noise, his soul drifted, back to the park bench, back to Richard, back to where it all began. Emily sat silently, holding his hand, whispering through tears. "You kept your promise, Leo. You never stopped smiling." When the ceremony ended, she asked that no announcement be made until the next morning. "Let him have this one last moment," she said. "A farewell among laughter, not sorrow." The next day, the world learned that Leo, the boy who once sold flowers to survive, had passed away at the very place where his destiny began. But instead of mourning, people celebrated his life. Millions of flowers were laid at park benches around the world in tribute. For one entire week, people across cities, towns, and villages smiled at strangers, helped the needy, and shared food with the poor, a global wave of kindness born from one man's example. Months later, Emily established the *Leo Foundation for Hope*, a branch dedicated to mentoring young leaders who would continue spreading compassion. On the wall of its headquarters, engraved in gold, were Richard's final words, "A smile doesn't end when lips close. It lives on in hearts that remember." Years later, when Emily grew too old to travel, she would often sit in that same park, watching children run and laugh just like before. Every time she saw a child offering a flower to someone, she felt peace. She would whisper to herself, "He's here. They're both here." And when her own time came, she too was laid to rest beside the same bench, under the tree where her father and Leo had once shared laughter and tears. The park became a sacred place, not of mourning, but of joy, where people from all over the world came to leave flowers, prayers, and promises. Today, decades later, the Smile Project still exists. Children in distant lands know the story of the billionaire who hid his identity to find his heart again. Teachers tell it not as a tale of wealth, but as a testament to love. And somewhere, in the breeze that moves through the flowers, one might still hear a faint whisper, gentle, eternal, and full of peace. Keep smiling, and the world will remember.